It is 11 at night. You push yourself up from the couch to get a glass of water. Your dog, who has been asleep on the far side of the room for the past 20 minutes, opens one eye. By the time you reach the kitchen doorway, they are 3 feet behind you. You fill the glass. They sit. You drink it standing at the counter, the way you always do, for no particular reason. They wait. You turn off the light. They follow you back. They circle once and lie down in the exact spot they just left, as if the detour served some purpose only they understood. Nothing happened. There was nothing in the kitchen. You were not interesting. There was no food involved and no particular reason for that 12-foot round trip to require a companion. And yet, most owners have a single word for this behavior: clingy. Some assume it means something went wrong in the dog's early socialization. Some assume it indicates anxiety. A few chalk it up to breed, a lab being a lab, a shepherd being a shepherd, the herding instinct finding something to track. But behavioral neuroscience tells a completely different story about what that dog's brain is actually doing. And when you understand the real mechanism, you will not be able to see it the same way again. Most owners assume following behavior is about comfort. The dog wants to be near you because it feels good, which is true, technically. But that explanation has the same problem as saying a heart beats because it likes to contract. True at one level, entirely unhelpful at any level that matters. Others assume it is about attachment in the simple sense, the same way a young child clings to a parent. Some assume it is dominance related. Some assume the dog just does not know what to do with itself. Here is the problem. If this were simple comfort seeking, it would be consistent. A dog chasing comfort would follow at the same rate on easy Sunday afternoons as on stressful Thursday evenings with strangers in the house and an unfamiliar noise coming from the heating system. But that is not what happens. The following behavior intensifies in precisely those conditions and reduces in familiar, predictable, low-demand environments. The pattern is not random. It is not emotional. What researchers found when they began tracking it systematically is that the following behavior is strategic, and the strategy your dog is running is one of the most sophisticated cognitive operations their nervous system is capable of executing. In 2015, researchers at the University of Vienna's Messerli Research Institute ran a series of structured trials with 81 adult dogs and their owners. The design was specific. They introduced novel objects, unfamiliar people, and unusual sounds into familiar rooms, and then measured not simply whether dogs moved toward their owner, but the sequence of what happened before the movement. What they found surprised the research team. In roughly 73% of cases, before the dog moved toward the owner, the dog looked at the owner's face. The movement came second. The gaze came first. The dog was not running to safety. They were reading a face and then deciding what to do with the information they received. This is a behavior called social referencing, using another individual's emotional response as a guide for evaluating an ambiguous situation. Human developmental psychologists first documented it in infants in the 1970s. A 14-month-old child, encountering something uncertain, looks at a parent's face before deciding how to respond. If the parent looks calm, the child explores. If the parent looks alarmed, the child retreats. The child is outsourcing part of the threat appraisal process to a more experienced reference point. The Vienna team found that dogs do precisely this, with the same functional precision and with the same directionality. They do not reference a random human in the room. They reference you, the specific individual their nervous system has identified as the most reliable environmental information source available to them. Translate that into plain terms. When your dog follows you to the kitchen, they are not following the water glass. They are following the data feed. There is a second study that makes this more specific. In 2019, a team at Barnard College in New York ran trials with 47 dogs in which the owners were placed in one of three conditions: fully attentive to the dog, present but looking at a phone, or absent from the room entirely with a recent warm interaction before leaving. The researchers found that dogs adjusted their behavior specifically in response to whether the owner was engaged, not simply whether they were physically present. Dogs whose owners were in the room but distracted showed significantly higher salivary cortisol than dogs whose owners had left entirely after a warm, engaged interaction. The dogs with the absent but warm owners were calmer than the dogs with the present but disengaged owners. Let that sit for a moment. Your presence alone is not what your dog is seeking when they follow you. Your engaged presence is what their nervous system registers as safety. And there is a neurological reason for that distinction that goes several layers deeper than behavior. But here is where it gets really interesting, because social referencing is not just a habit, it is a neural architecture. And what that architecture is built on connects your dog's ordinary nighttime trip to the kitchen to 12,000 years of co-evolutionary history. When your dog checks your face before deciding how to respond to something uncertain, they are activating a specific region of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for emotional, regulation, and context-dependent decision-making. Research published by the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics in 2022, using non-invasive neuroimaging in dogs, found that owner faces are processed in a neurologically distinct way from stranger faces, regardless of the expression on either face. It is not that your face is familiar and a stranger's face is not. Your face is privileged. It occupies a dedicated processing space in your dog's brain that was reserved specifically for it across repeated meaningful interaction. Stranger faces, even frequent ones, do not access that space. This level of preferential processing required substantial evolutionary investment, and that investment has a history worth understanding. The genetic and archaeological record places the origin of the dog wolf split somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, depending on the study and the method. For the majority of that time, dogs were not pets. They were foragers and camp companions. The relationship was functional. Dogs gained predictable access to human food sources and shelter. Humans gained early warning systems and, eventually, cooperative hunting partners. But something deeper than function was being built alongside the utility. At a site called Ain Malaha, in what is now northern Israel, archaeologists in 1978 uncovered a burial estimated at 12,000 years old. A human skeleton, believed to be an elderly woman based on bone structure, buried with her hand resting on the body of a puppy. The puppy had been deliberately positioned. No tools, no food offerings, no other grave goods. Just the hand and the dog. By 12,000 years ago, the relationship had already become personal enough to carry into burial ritual. Personal enough to mark with a gesture that required intention. The following behavior you observe at 11 at night is the behavioral surface of a neurological bond that was already old when the pyramids were new. And this is where it gets deep. A 2023 study from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences added the genetic dimension. Researchers examined the oxytocin receptor gene, specifically a variant known as OXTR, and found that dogs carrying a particular allele of this gene showed significantly stronger social referencing behavior and spent measurably more time in close proximity to their owners during conditions of mild environmental stress. This is not a learned trait. The oxytocin receptor architecture was installed at the genetic level before any individual dog drew its first breath. Your dog did not choose to find you regulating in uncertain moments. They were built to. Now here is the finding that stops most people. In 2018, a research team at Tufts University's Cummings School of Veterinary Medicine published a comparative study of 62 dogs, 31 with clinically confirmed separation, anxiety, and 31 without. They measured following distance, gaze frequency, physical contact initiation, and time spent within 1 meter of the owner at home. The dogs with separation anxiety did not follow their owners more. There was no statistically significant difference in home proximity behavior between the two groups. Both groups followed. Both groups maintained close proximity. Both groups initiated contact at comparable rates. And yet one group was in genuine clinical distress. One group was vocalizing for hours during absences, refusing food, and showing physiological stress markers that affected their long-term health. The other group was fine. How is that possible? If following behavior came from anxiety, the more anxious dogs should show more of it at home. They did not. So following behavior, in itself, tells you almost nothing about whether a dog is psychologically secure or psychologically distressed. The same surface behavior can come from two completely different neurological states. Sit with that for a moment, because most of the popular guidance on this topic, reduce following, build independence, ignore the dog when they trail you, is addressing the behavior without understanding what is driving it. And addressing a behavior that looks the same regardless of the underlying state is not a useful intervention. The resolution requires looking at what happens after the dog reaches you. A dog following from a place of security shows a specific sequence. They reach proximity. They check in visually, sometimes just a brief glance at your face, and then they disengage. They lie down. Their breathing slows. Muscle tension releases. The arrival completes the information cycle and the nervous system can rest. A dog following from anxiety cannot complete that cycle. Proximity is achieved. The arousal does not reduce. They pace, or they stay braced, or they position themselves between you and the door. The following is not a choice they made. It is a compulsion that does not discharge when satisfied. The detail that changes everything is this: not whether your dog follows, What happens when they arrive? There is a more recent layer to this. Research published by Purdue University's College of Veterinary Medicine in 2022 found that the degree of post-following physiological settling, specifically the rate at which heart rate variability returned to baseline after the dog reached the owner, was the single most reliable behavioral predictor of secure versus anxious attachment in a home context. More predictive than duration of following. More predictive than how close the dog stayed. A dog whose nervous system settles when it reaches you is doing exactly what healthy social referencing is supposed to do. A dog whose nervous system stays activated even in contact with you is telling you something that needs a different kind of response. Your dog is not clingy. They are running the most sophisticated social information gathering system that a non-human animal has ever evolved to direct at a single individual. And that individual is you. Your dog is not following you because they cannot be alone. They are following you because you are the highest information entity in their environment. And maintaining proximity to you is how their nervous system stays calibrated about what the world is doing. Your dog is not anxious when they get up to follow you to the kitchen. They are consulting the one reference point their brain has identified, through months or years of confirmed experience, as the most reliable predictor of whether the current moment is safe or uncertain. Now think about what this means. Every time you walk into a room and your dog looks up, holds your gaze for 2 seconds, and then looks back down and stays where they are, that is the system working perfectly. They checked. They found you. They registered your state as stable. They went back to rest. That 2-second glance is not trivial. It is the entire process completing in real time. And every time your dog gets up and follows you somewhere that seems meaningless to you, remember that, from their vantage point, you are the event. You leaving the room is information. You returning is information. The quality of that information, whether you seem calm, engaged, and reliable, is what determines whether their nervous system can genuinely rest in the intervals between those checks. Your dog is not following you. They are maintaining signal with the most important data source in their world. And when you understand that, your own ordinary presence, calm, warm, consistent, becomes something different. It becomes the most structurally important thing you offer. There are signals that tell you the following behavior has shifted out of the healthy range and into something that deserves clinical attention. Watch for following that is accompanied by panting or yawning in contexts that are not physically demanding. These are displacement behaviors indicating physiological arousal your dog cannot regulate. They mean the check-in is not completing the cycle. Something is keeping the activation running. Watch for a dog who physically cannot disengage once proximity is achieved. They follow, they arrive, and they stay braced. No muscle release, no settling. The urgency is present even when you are right there. That pattern belongs in a conversation with a veterinary behaviorist. And watch for what researchers call pre-departure anxiety. A dog who begins showing physiological stress cues not when you leave, but when you begin the preparation behaviors associated with leaving. The shoes, the keys, the bag. If those cues alone are producing panting, pacing, or salivation before you have taken a single step toward the door, the anxiety has generalized beyond the separation event itself. That is a different clinical picture than following behavior, and it requires a different response. The question I want to leave with you is this. If your dog follows one person in your household more than any other, I would genuinely like to know who that person is and what you think makes them different. Is it the most attentive person? The calmest one? The one with the most predictable schedule? Leave it in the comments, because the pattern that emerges from that question maps almost exactly onto what the research predicts. There is a layer of this we have not touched today. What happens inside a dog's brain during the hours that the primary reference source is not available? What that absence actually costs neurologically, and what it genuinely requires from us to address. That is where we go next. Your dog is not following you because something went wrong in their development. They are following you because something went profoundly right. Something that took 12,000 years of mutual investment to build. Something your ordinary movements through your ordinary house are enough to confirm, one more time, that you are still the one worth tracking. That is not clinginess. That is the most faithful expression of trust one species has ever learned to direct at another.